This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avkin Incorporated, your one-stop shop for everything standardized patient and wearable simulator.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Simulation Nation. We have an incredible interview today with Crystel Farina. She is going to be discussing some of the hot topics in terms of running a simulation center. So we're going to be getting into budgets, justification, and hiring. And I think Crystel's perspective on it is really important because we can learn a lot of these things from a business side of things or a leadership side of things. But there is a very important component when you're looking at it from a healthcare simulation standpoint, because there are a lot of nuances that come into it. So Crystel runs the Simulation Center at George Washington.
She's actually the assistant dean.
The assistant dean.
She has moved on up.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Crystel. Not surprised.
She just recently hired her director of simulation to replace her.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
But being able to have an assistant dean then that has a simulation background, I definitely think that makes it a lot easier too to be a
well, and
director.
that's why I asked her, right?
It's
That's why I wanted
great.
to meet with her and talked with her to, about all of this. It was really important because she really sees things now from a 360 perspective.
And I think when you get to that next level too, there's so much more that comes into it in terms of what you're looking at. But I think that one of the main things that I think is so important when you're looking at these crucial kind of business sides of running a sim center, right, is that there are certain nuances that don't just translate over from business and leadership. There are certain things that come into it. So again, I know that we just did a sim summit at George Washington this past fall. And when we were there, Crystel really focused on the psychological safety aspect of simulation, which again, we all know is a cornerstone. We all know that to basically have a successful sim program, it needs to be psychologically safe, right? That is a cornerstone.
But it's kind of a newer concept. It's not. It didn't come out early on, and so that's it's gained a lot of favor very quickly because we can see the benefits of it, right?
Yeah.
But it is something where we had to kind of start running to catch up because we hadn't been there from the beginning.
Well, and it changes it, right? Because I think that for a simulation center to be run successfully, that psychological safety has to be a foundation, right? It has to be the foundation of it. But it's really hard when you've had a sim program running for many, many years to now almost reverse it to make something the foundation of it, right? If it wasn't built off that foundation, you then have to kind of go in and do a lot of excavation and things along those lines to make sure you're putting it back down as that foundation for how your sim program
Yeah, I mean,
grows.
it comes into policies and procedures. It comes into what, that you're having routine education for your simulation faculty, all of those things.
And I think Crystel hit on that really well in terms of the hiring component of it, because again, you can't just go into terms of like, well, who's the most qualified, who's going to take the offer that we have, the salary range that we have, and then we just bring them in and we train them and that's it. They do have to have certain qualities of what they're focused on, along with your policy and procedure and training, but you do need to have someone who's coming in with the mindset. And it reminds me a lot of what I talk about frequently in terms of bringing in standardized patients is they can be a great actor. They can be someone who wants the job. It doesn't mean that they're always the right fit for it, right? You have to be in consideration of the student and their learning and really have them at the forefront. And if your SPs don't have that, you're not going to have a psychologically safe simulation. And I think she brought that up too in the hiring process of focusing on that psychological safety piece of it. And I think that that's, again, just like such a huge component. And I think that she can approach this topic from such a place of leadership and, again, in authority to be able to discuss it further in terms of the important pieces of it.
Well, and I also think it's just growth over time, right? She has so many, just like Elena Harrington's interview, she really talks about how all of her different experiences in her life really led her to where she is. And for her, this was, I think, the first time that she ever had the unique position of hiring her replacement.
Yeah.
And thinking about that. And I think that that's just, again, it was just really a fun conversation. So I'm really excited to have everybody hear a little bit more about what Crystel has to say.
Yep. So let's dive into that interview.
All right, Crystel, well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Simulation Nation. As you know, this is really I'm going to read the title so I make sure I get this right. Simulationist Guide to Budgets, Justification, and Hiring. Oh my. Megan must have come up with a really creative title there. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what drew you into simulation?
Before we even had a nursing theory, when I graduated, so I'm going to take you way back. When I graduated with my BSN, I happened to be walking in the hallway of the hospital one day, and one of my previous faculty said, "Hey, I heard you just got your bachelor's degree. We need someone in the skills lab. Are you interested?" And I said, maybe I hadn't thought about teaching. And that sort of, I went for interview, I got the job, and it's like the same old story everybody tells. They had some man original in a box in a closet, and it was, we were hiring somebody I had no technical experience, opened him up, put him in the bed, and started reading the directions and figuring out what we could do. And I was hooked from there on. And so I've actually been doing simulations since 2004.
So I started it in 2006, but very similar, where I was hired. They actually did post for skills and simulation coordinator. So I was doing both. But I remember the first year of just kind of like, I was a little afraid of this thing because I didn't have the technology background. We interviewed Elena earlier, and she was talking about how from the OR, she was super tech savvy because they had new pieces of equipment and she was very comfortable. So I was like, that was not my story. And I could remember having to go up into the program of the computer to put the algorithms in, and how, intimidating that was, that obviously things have advanced much since that time. But you were a few years earlier. So it must have been a huge compliment for you to get asked by your faculty member to work in the skills lab shortly after graduation. I don't know that there's probably two handfuls of students in all of my years that I would have brought back immediately. So that's kudos to you. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was really nice. It was a little strange to work with faculty that had been my teachers, but it was a really wonderful experience for me. And they also encouraged me to get my master's degree and then start my PhD program. So they have been supporters and mentors the whole time.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I graduated in 87 from nursing school and then went back in 2006, and some of the faculty were still there. So I can relate to it on a smaller level because clearly, this was fairly shortly after you graduated.
Yeah.
So what part of nursing did you get into? What was your, what did you choose as far as when you left the program? Where did you start working?
Well, I always wanted to be an ICU nurse, and I loved burns. However, at the time, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for that. And so I ended up taking a job on med-surg, fell in love with it, and then kind of specialized med-surg, pain management, and oncology were my specialties.
Wow. So you must have been super organized, because med-surg was definitely not for this not so organized individual. I mean, I know I'm the CEO of a company, but I still don't feel as though I still am organizing my kitchen cabinets and getting things done. But time management was always an issue for me until I ended up in the emergency department. And that's where I found my niche for sure.
Well, you do have to be organized. That is true. And your assessment skills, you really hone that time management and assessment skills when you're in med-surg, because you can't rely on the monitors and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So you can walk into a room and just notice something's wrong. You might not know what it is, but something's wrong.
Yeah. The spidey senses go up for sure, right? So you started a hospital, you started doing the skills lab, I'm assuming part-time. And then at some point you transitioned into a full-time position.
Yes.
What about what time was that?
Well, let me take you back a little bit. I graduated from a RN diploma program in 1996.
Wow.
And so it was when I graduated from my BSN. So I did an RN to BSN program at Wilmington University in 2004. That's when I went to teach. So I had been a nurse for a little while, about 8 years before I actually started teaching.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Gotcha. So the 2004 was when you started in the skills lab. And then at some point, Simban came along probably pretty shortly after you got there, right?
Yeah, he was already there when I got there.
Okay. So there was an early adopter somewhere, or at least an innovator that believed in what you were doing, but hadn't gotten him out of the box yet, huh?
Well, the neat thing, in the state of Maryland, we had a legislative person, and I can't remember if she was part of the Maryland Senate or House, forgive me for that part, but she had written a bill to get every community college in the state of Maryland a STEM-man.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because she had gone to something that, said this was the new training. And so every community college in the state of Maryland received a SimMan from this grant that she wrote.
That is a huge investment.
It is.
Investment. And if they would do that every 5 years, that would be amazing.
It would be fantastic. On top of that, Maryland did some really interesting things that she connected all this together. And it was about the who will care and the nurse support services. And so because of that original grant for SimMan, and then this nursing support grant that is continuing today through the Maryland Higher Education Commission, the state of Maryland will pay for nurses to get their master's degree and doctoral degrees.
Wow.
Yeah, so but you have to commit that you will work in the state of Maryland.
Yeah.
And so it is really a fantastic grant. However they wrote it, it's like $2 of every Medicare and Medicaid bed in all the hospitals goes into this pool to support nursing education. I wish every state would do it because it is a fantastic just way to support the healthcare of the state.
Right. And it's, I mean, like you said, it's like, it's minimal per, if you look at it, how to acquire that, it's just huge.
Yeah. And it might be $2 or $3. I don't, but it's a couple dollars from every bed, and it has continued to grow. It also supports nurse residency programs in the state. So it's a really good,
that's fantastic. Good. Well, that, again, great model. I know that Elena was talking about how Sabrina was able to, develop a tool that helped, assess the entire state of Maryland for their simulation needs, because probably some had that SimMan still in their closet in 2000 whenever Sabrina went through and did that. So great stuff coming out of there. But the way that Elena and Sabrina and Crystal and I have all been connected is through our NLN Simulation Fellowship, and that was in 2015. So can you tell me a little bit about how you learned about it, and really what intrigued you, and really what impact did this fellowship have on you?
Well, I can tell you that the fellowship was life-changing for me. So prior to the fellowship, I had been working with our nursing program to integrate simulation into the curriculum. I had done my master's project on that, developing a guide for integrating simulation. And so really was trying to focus a lot of simulation on our nursing program. And the college president, because this was while I was at Chesapeake College, offered a grant for professional development for faculty. And it was looking for faculty to do leadership things. And I don't know what came first, her offering this grant or getting the email that the NLN was doing this SimLead program. But I applied. I really worked hard on the application because I thought, okay, I'm trying to be a sim leader. I don't know that I am, but here's what I have to put forward. I had developed an iBook for simulation. So our school was a iPad school from Apple. And so I developed this iBook that had all the patient scenarios in it, and I made them patient stories. So the students got to download the iBook for free, and they got their stories. So they knew a little bit about their patient before they went and took care of them in the simulation setting.
I love that.
So I think that's how I got into the NLN SimLead, because I in my application, I told what I'd been doing in simulation.
Yeah.
And so then when I got accepted, I applied for the grant from our college president and received that. And so I was on my way.
Yeah.
And when I say it was life-changing, it truly changed my whole teaching trajectory.
So when I applied, very similar to you, I worked fervently on that application because my motivation was I thought Pam Jeffries was going to read this application. And I had been chasing Pam, obviously I think it was a framework at that point, but I had been chasing Pam when she was at Hopkins. I wanted to take a course that she was teaching, and I applied, but I got rejected because it was an online course. And so because it was some type of collaborative agreement between Delaware and Maryland, I wasn't able to take the course. And I was literally heartbroken. And so I thought, well, this is one way to really rub shoulders with her and get, learn from her experiences. And so I thought, well, if she's reading it, I need to really make sure I spend some, intense time focusing on it. Elena had a very similar response of it was life-changing. I think all of us felt as though we've done some amazing things, and probably we were accepted to the Simling program because we had done some really cool things. But we also then got to hear from other simulationists how cool what we were doing. And again, we talked about it with Elena, but just how much we have supported each other over the years. And that support continues, well into, this year. It's going to be our 10-year anniversary coming up in 2025. And we talked about, getting together and going to, away to the Bahamas or somewhere and enjoying each other's company. So it won't be under the same circumstances that we all met in 2025, but we do definitely want to commemorate that experience, because I think all of us walked away with not just really good information and not just more leadership skills, but with a group, a cohort of people that were going to cheer us on, from the beginning to the end. So I definitely agree with you on that. And so as far as your career trajectory piece of this, can you elucidate a little bit more on that? Can you give a little more information?
I can. So at the time I was at Chesapeake, and I was just a faculty member and the skills lab and simulation person. Didn't really have a title. And once I did the leadership, the Sim Lead program, at about the same time, our School of Nursing was moving away from the hospital and moving to the main campus of the college. And so I, talked to the president, because now that I received her grant, she kind of met with me regularly because she wanted to know how my leadership was going.
Wow.
And so that was fantastic because, now I'm talking with the college president. And so we started talking about the design of the new School of Nursing. And so I got to actually work with the architects to talk about, what we needed to do to make simulation the focus. And it was not just for the School of Nursing, but all of our health professions. So we had EMS services, rad tech, dental assistant, CNA, a couple other programs in there. And surgical tech. And so really got to be an integral part of that, and became the director of simulation and health professions at Chesapeake. And so once the building opened and we were up and running, an opportunity came open to work with Pam Jeffries at George Washington University. Yeah. I think it was actually her that shared the job posting with our SimLead group. And so I looked at it and thought, wow, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know if I can do that. And through the encouragement of my Sim sisters, Amy and Tanya and Elena and Nancy, I did apply and got the job and had the most amazing experience working with Pam Jeffries as my dean at GW. And since then, I've been the director of simulation and experiential learning for about the past 7 years. And then just recently, I've become the associate dean of BSN program.
Great. So just for those of you that are listening that don't know Pam, she is the most humble, most open, caring person. We put her on a pedestal because she's done some amazing things in simulation, but she really is, she's the one that's going to point to what everybody else is doing rather than herself. So just know that, yes, at least I still fangirl over her. I'm not sure if you do or not.
No, I do. I still do.
It is one of those things of, and maybe it is because of her approach, she's just so easily approachable. She's so humble. And she's just such an amazing person. I remember when I approached her about asking her permission to modify her theory to include standardized patient methodology. And she was just so incredibly gracious. And she said, you might want to consider creating your own model. And I said, well, I don't want to confuse things. Your theory is really held true and you've modified it over time. I don't want to muddy the water and make my own theory that would potentially be in conflict or competition, but that I loved what she had done. And I just wanted to include standardized patients because she was really predominantly mannequin focused in her simulations. And my focus was definitely on the standardized patient realm for sure. So she's amazing. Don't feel like you can't go up and talk to her. She's definitely very, very approachable. So just transitioning to the budget piece of this. So how long have you had a specific budget for your sim center? Because it doesn't sound like when you first started off, it was that way.
Yeah. So when I was at Chesapeake, I did not have, I was not in control of the budget. So I would make recommendations and submit, like budget requests of here's the amount of supplies that we need for the skills lab. Here are the things that we need in simulation. And then I would make recommendations on this is the simulators that we need to purchase. And we kind of did it as a group, myself and the EMS program director, the Surge Tech program director. We talked about equipment and those things together. And then when I came to GW, there was already a simulation budget in place, but it was controlled by the BSN programs. So whoever oversaw the whole BSN program oversaw the simulation budget. And Pam said, I'd really like you to take this on. I'd like you to do, whatever you need in the budget. And so I looked at, what we had spent in the previous years on supplies. And then her and I worked collaboratively to decide, okay, where are we going? Like, what are the things that we need? And that's when I got together a simulation advisory committee to say, okay, I don't want to make the decision on what mannequins or wearables or equipment that we purchase. I want to I want to have input from everybody, because while I have experience, I want to know what everybody else thinks. And so that kind of started that process of, okay, here's the budget and I oversee it, but there is input from others. And so, one of the things I noticed is we need a women's health simulator, something that's going to do, all kinds of women's health needs, whether it's delivery of a baby, doesn't much matter, but I need to be able to show those sort of obstetrical emergencies, postpartum. And so through input from everybody, we purchased a new obstetrical simulator, and we used that for thing. She has birthed over 300 babies. So she is, she's worn out, but she does a good job. And so that's how I got input for the things that we needed in our budget. And I try to plan ahead.
So who was on your advisory council?
Faculty from the pediatrics nursing, med-surg nursing. I had some students on, and some people from the graduate program also.
Great. So you really didn't have to advocate for a budget. You had to figure out how to get it from a BSN budget to a larger span into the graduate program.
Yeah.
But if you think about offering advice out to someone, do you have any advice if somebody did need to advocate for their own budget? Because I know that there are still a lot of simulation centers that don't have their own budget.
A couple of things that you really got to do is do your background work. So if you need to make purchases or you need to have your own budget, you've got to be able to say why. Why do I need my own budget? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. My voice.
No worries.
You've got to be able to tell why you need that budget. And if you're planning on making big purchases, think ahead and think about what your future is going to be. Like, what's the mission and vision going to be as you move forward?
Yeah. And I will say that at the University of Delaware perspective, I didn't have any background in business. I didn't have any, I didn't understand budgets. I budgeted in my home, but I didn't really understand how to translate it out. And so it took me a long time to figure out exactly what needed to happen in order to, how did I need to present myself in a way that would have the business people or the dean or director to understand what the needs were, because they really didn't spend a lot of time down there. They would bring people through on tours and it looked great, but obviously the day-to-day is very different. And so it took me some time, but making sure you do have your ducks in a row. I know for my dean, I literally would have to, I'd get the quote, I'd print out a document that had, I get the one pager or the product sheet that has all the features and functions. And then I would also have to submit a proposal and say, this is how it's going to be used. This is how many times it's going to be used. This is when we anticipate it's going to need to be replaced. But if you aren't budget minded, you have to not just think about what you need immediately, what's in front of you, but also all of the other pieces that go into this. Like that, especially the technology, right? Like that technology starts off as, this is a really great item and it's maybe grant funded, but is there software that you're going to have to pay for as an annual fee? Is there any fees that are going to be passed on to the students with that? How are you going to make sure that if you're advocating for an AV system, how are you going to make sure that there's no FERPA violations and that the students are aware? There's all these different pieces, and you have to consider that all before the yes happens. So, in doing that, Elena said, I didn't have any business background, but when I got my master's, I got it in administration because I needed to understand it. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you have to get your master's in, but do think about Google is a great resource to help people as they're starting to create this and having to think differently than I think most nurses think. We never knew the cost of things. We never saw the budgets. Elena was saying that in their pick sheets from the OR, they would know actually how much each of the trays cost or how much each of the things cost. Me personally, I never had exposure to that. So I really had to, it was a big learning curve for sure.
Well, and it helped me. Prior to going to nursing school, I wanted to be an accountant.
Oh, well, there you go.
I had a little business background.
Yeah.
And so you are absolutely right. You do have to think about all of those things. GW sort of makes it easy. We have an expense justification and then a sole source memoing thing that you have to complete.
Okay.
And so anytime I want to make a big purchase, I take those forms and look at them. Okay, why are we getting it? How are we going to use it? And then, compare it to the other three. And we usually do try to get 3 bids to determine what we're going to, and why we're picking the one we are.
Right. So those justification templates, it really walks you through step by step and asks the questions that you are going to probably need to answer for the business office as well as anybody that is, if you don't have your own budget. And I think even if you're not doing that, even with purchasing, they do still want you to fill out that information so that they're understanding that this purchase has been made with thought and intention.
Yeah. And anything you purchase, you need to think about warranties and what that warranty cost is. And do you need a warranty?
Yeah.
Sometimes you really do if it's something that you're buying that's technologically really complicated, but sometimes you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, you have to weigh your options. At some point, is it better to not use, if you have a sim man that's over 5 years or something, is it better to hold off and use that warranty? I don't even know if they cover them after 5 years, but use that warranty money to start working towards capital budget. But then again, sometimes capital budget comes out of a completely different area. So just ask a lot of questions. I remember that when I first started, I had a $250,000 grant and I didn't know it until it was all, they said you have 2 months to spend this money. But when I had taken the position, the grant had already been awarded and nobody had told me when I was, in the first year. So I had 2 months to come up with things that I needed, not knowing that I had that as an option. So, learning that stuff, getting the ins and outs of procurement is a really good idea if you're kind of new to the simulation or / business world.
And it's always good to keep a list of like a wish list of what you want, because sometimes money appears in higher education. Yeah. Somebody has decided to make a donation or you get a grant and you've got 30 days to spend. Have a wish list already going of what you really want. Because at the end of the year, if you have money left over in your budget, if you don't spend it, they're going to take it and then your budget will be cut by that amount the next year. So Make sure you spend everything that you plan for.
Yeah, we have a lot of people purchasing wearable simulators in the second quarter. So that from April, May, June in that area, because it is end of budget. And so, again, a dean or a director might find some extra money that could be used, or, it was written into a grant. We had a situation that happened recently where the wearables had been written into the grant by a former dean, and that dean was no longer there, but the wearables had already been, accounted for. So there is definitely, turn over every rock and make sure you're prepared or ready for the purchases that you would like, getting quotes from different vendors if that's something that you're, that you think is a possibility. But there's also foundations or donors that might come through and be willing to, invest in nursing. There's the nursing shortage is very real right now. And there, it's not just healthcare that is aware of the shortage, but it is also people that are philanthropic. So they're looking for ways to support different nursing and simulation programs.
Especially if they've had like a nursing student or something provide care to a family member, and that student says what school they're from, often they'll get a donation.
Oh, wow. I've never heard of that, but that's, yeah, I agree with you for sure. So thinking about, you were hired at GW by Pam, which again, to me, that's like the pinnacle. I know she's moved on, but I would definitely consider that a huge compliment. And I do see it as a huge compliment that she did send it out to the 2015 group. I don't know if she sent it out to all NLN sim leads, but I do think we had a special place in her heart. We were her last ones, right?
Yes, we were her last group.
Yeah. So when you were going into that, did you have a full simulation faculty that were already with you, or did you have to hire people?
So I had to hire people. It's an interesting story. On my first day, the sim manager gave me his resignation, and I thought, holy cow, is it me? But he was going to resign anyway. So we went through some, struggles there in the beginning. I had a sim staff, but not dedicated sim faculty.
Okay.
And so at the time, all of the faculty that taught in the program were required to do 40 hours of sim throughout the semester, or at least 1 credit of sim per semester. So we, every faculty member supported sim and was in doing their simulation scenarios.
So are you saying clinical faculty, didactic faculty, or both?
It was our full-time faculty. So most of them were didactic faculty. A couple of them also taught clinical, but they had been, it was a didactic faculty requirement.
Interesting. So obviously we're past 2015 now. We're probably 2017, 2018. Standards of best practice are out. And so we know that simulation is this very unique way of educating and really requires a lot of education. And the standards of best practice have really supported professional development for anybody that's doing simulation. So how did you manage to make sure that everybody that was in the didactic faculty, or even just full-time faculty, were prepared to be simulationists or simulation facilitators at least?
Well, at the time, we had a couple faculty that were already certified as healthcare simulation educators. So that was important to Pam and the program. But what we did find is they had received that certification early. And, simulation is one of those things that is evolving and continuing to change. And so we implemented a couple different things. We required that people receive professional development in simulation at least once per year. And then with Pam and many other sim leaders, we developed the massive open online course through Coursera, The Essentials of Clinical Simulation in Health Professions. And so then we required every one of our faculty to do that MOOC. I also developed a debriefing workshop that is online for the GW faculty. And so we make sure that every faculty member has simulation education through the MOOC. Now, granted, the current one that's out there, the standards of best practice, are not the most up-to-date. Everything else is pretty up-to-date. We are working on developing a new one with the up-to-date standard.
Okay, so forgive my ignorance on this. I know that Sabrina worked on this MOOC, but can you tell, is that something that anybody could access, or is that only for GW faculty?
No, anyone. In fact, we've had over 20,000, almost 20,000 people take that now. You can go online. You can just Google Essentials of Clinical Simulation through Coursera, because Coursera owns it. GW makes no money on this whatsoever. It's open to the public. You can pay when you're done the course. You can pay and receive a certificate, or they just send you an email that says you've completed the course.
Wow, that's excellent. I didn't realize it was open access for anyone to utilize. So, for those programs that are struggling to have some professional development opportunities, or just simply don't have the time, or maybe they're the one-man band, like having any clinical faculty or having anyone that is going to be joining them, we'll put that in the link so that other people can access it. I wasn't aware of it, so I'm sure that there are others that aren't. So one of the best kept secrets that, again, another major thing that Pam supported to get out there to make sure that simulation standards were being followed. Now, again, as you said, there's new standards that have been updated and things have been refreshed, and that's just the way it is. But it gives them a great start, right? It gives them a great foothold to get things going and feeling as though they're making a difference for their, the people that are joining them in simulation, that maybe it's not their first glove, it might be their second.
Yeah, and the nice thing about that MOOC is that there's modules on, like Pam does the introductory module talking about the theory, and then Sabrina does the module about the standards of best practice. My module is all about budgeting and expenses and those kinds of things. And then there are other leaders doing really great modules. Chris Tripus does the module on debriefing, and I can't remember, Susie Cardenegrin is also part of it. I can't remember what her module is right off the top of
On research or publishing.
something. There was something on that, yes.
Well, that's amazing. And again, I think the simulation world is small. It's getting bigger, but people are well connected, and so having the experts in there delivering that information is so valuable. So again, we'll put that link in so that people have access to that, because I think it's really important that we are putting word out on that. So if you think about hiring a simulationist, and I know you've now moved on to a different role where you're even a step farther, but when you were hiring people, what were the things that you were looking for when you were interviewing for an applicant?
So it really depended on what role I was looking for. So if there was someone like my SimHops team, I was looking for, did they have any healthcare knowledge whatsoever? And the reason that SimOps needs some healthcare knowledge, they don't have to be a nurse, but they need some sort of healthcare knowledge, is so that they understand the terminology. Because, when we talk about gauze or syringe, or, that the patient's tachycardic, bradycardic, they don't always know exactly what that means. We've got like increased heart rate, slow the heart rate, those kinds of things.
Sure.
So I'm looking for some kind of healthcare knowledge. And then when it comes to faculty, I want to know that they have an interest in simulation. And, do they have any knowledge whatsoever? Because we're such a small world, not everyone does. And so you want to know, are they interested? Do they have a passion for it?
Okay.
Many people that come in for the interviews don't know anything about it, and then don't really want to be part of simulation. And I'm thinking, well, wait a second, you applied for a simulation role. Don't say that in a job description.
Right.
But they're just trying to get their foot in the door. So you really want to know that they have a passion, not just for simulation itself, because sometimes they don't know anything about simulation, but they have a passion for student learning and a passion for learning in a psychologically safe environment. And that really is the key. You want to know that whoever you're hiring is very interested in the student perception of the learning and what the student receives from it.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, psychological safety is something that's evolved over time. I definitely did not have a super psychologically safe sim center in the beginning. We didn't have standards of best practice, as you mentioned. So, I can remember I had to go back. I met a couple of my former graduates, when I was taking students into clinical, and I'd be like, I'm sorry that I scared you when you were doing central line test out or whatever it was. But, there is a responsibility that we have as educators to make sure that the next generation of healthcare providers is well prepared. But at the same point, we have a responsibility to make sure that that education is edifying to the learner and that is going to build them up rather than tear them down, which I think some people definitely miss. So I could definitely appreciate. And I think one of the other things with simulation is it's a really an active learning process, and so it is different than teaching a course or, doing a research project. It is very hands-on as a simulation facilitator, and it does require some self-awareness that you need to have. So I think that if they have a passion for that, it's a great foundation. Is there anything else that you would say that you were looking for?
Well, you want to know that the person recognizes that when a student is in a simulation, they're vulnerable, right? Because they've got all their peers watching, they're in there with, other team members. They really are in a vulnerable situation, and we want to protect them because they're nervous and they're going to make mistakes. they can absolutely know what they're supposed to do in this scenario, but their anxiety or their nervousness gets in the way. And so they do make mistakes.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that we, after the scenario, that we debrief and really think about or talk to the student about what they were thinking when they made a decision. It's not whether or not it was right or wrong. It's what were they actually thinking about that led them to that action, because then that tells us so much about where the student's thinking is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say in the last few years that I was doing simulation, I read an article that Nicole Harder had put out. It was probably an editorial in the clinical simulation in nursing, but she talked about how simulation is meant to stretch students to the edges of their ability. And it was so powerful to me to think about that's exactly what we want to do, right? Because if it's too easy, then there's no learning that's happening. If it's too hard, we stress them out and they are not learning anything. They're just in fight or flight mode. And so I would always talk about these simulations have been developed to stretch you to the edges of your ability in the pre-briefing. That was part of our pre-briefing script, so that the students knew that we knew that these were stretching simulations. And I think it made a difference for the students, for me to repeat that to them, that these simulations are created to stretch you to the edges of your ability. And then obviously during the debrief, we would talk about those stretches, right? We would talk about some of the learning things that happened, some of the things that, they weren't aware of. And it's simulation is such a great place to do that. And we just don't have the opportunity to do it in a clinical setting all the time. So, introducing that idea, even in the pre-brief, can be super helpful.
Oh, and when you do have a simulation scenario that does stretch them, it really enhances their critical thinking and their clinical judgment, right? If they've got to actually make a decision, they've got to think about the process or the pathophysiology or something that makes them make a decision that is a stretch, it really enhances their learning.
Yeah. Yeah. You think about that confidence and competence. That's what check, in those situations. Love watching that. So as far as this is just something that I ask for everybody that we do the interviews with, but a lot of people are trying to think of ways to do, community outreach or finding external revenue sources. Is there any good ways that you have found to create that, that, I don't know what it would be, but just the idea of, I guess, marketing efforts to get some external revenue opportunities?
So we're doing a couple different things. One, we have a whole series of simulation courses that we offer to the public. So you can do that massive open online course that's free, or you can pay the $35 for the certificate. But that provides kind of, a brief overview of simulation information. And then we do have simulation pedagogy courses that do a deep dive into the simulation theory, pre-briefing, the scenario development and implementation, and then debriefing. And we run those about once a year. We should have another group coming through in probably April, May time. And so you just have to check our website for those. And we do charge a fee for that course. So that is a revenue producer. The other thing that we do is rent out our simulation space. So other people use our space we have a whole OSCE center. So we do have other programs use our OSCE center. Because we look like a hospital inside our simulation space, we also have several film groups that come and use our space. And at GW, they have a whole, there's the whole school of the Cochran School of Arts. And so a lot of times students are doing some kind of art project, and now we give it to our students for free. But we try to make partnerships whenever we can with our clinical partners and for them to use our space, and then we get that clinical partnership agreement. So it's not always about the money changing hand, but it is about services changing.
Yeah, sure. So the course that you're talking about, you're referencing here, is it's a sequential course that they're working through. How long would it be? A couple of weeks?
It's a week. It's a week. They come onto campus for 5 days.
Oh, okay. So it's on site too.
Yes.
So what you would say is almost like a boot camp kind of idea.
It is a boot camp. By the time you're done, you will have written one simulation scenario and pilot tested it and pre-briefed it and debriefed it. Yes.
Excellent. Well, that's great. Well, good to know. So you can check out the GW website for more information on that. And then you've now moved into a new position as Assistant Dean of BSN Programs. And I know it's not so new. It's probably within the last year and a half. Am I right when I say that? So can you talk a little bit about what moved you to apply for that position and how you ended up and where you are right now?
Well, the position became available, and I did consider it because my PhD is in educational leadership.
Okay.
And so while my, BSN is nursing, I have a master's in nursing education. I did my PhD in educational leadership. And I did focus on learning and simulation, but it was really all about educational leadership. And so I just thought I would try. Because, you have to continue to grow and develop. And so I really like the new role. It's taken me a little further from simulation, but I'm able to support our new simulation director in a better way.
Yeah.
Additionally, it has some challenges with it that I really enjoy. Like I'm enjoying, the regulations and the curriculum changes and making sure that we can integrate simulation into the curriculum in a meaningful way.
That's excellent. Yeah, I remember the first time when I developed the healthcare theater program, and my dean said, you're going to have to step away from doing simulation every day. And I cried. I literally cried. I was so embarrassed that I cried, but I just loved doing it so much. And I obviously am now more removed from simulation than I had been in the past. But obviously still my heart is there and, love every moment of it. And when I get to do it virtually, I get really excited. But the idea, I can remember a mentor of mine at the university, she said, Amy, when you graduate from nursing school and you take care of patients, if you think about a stone going into the water, your ripple effect is very close, right? You're having an impact on, one patient at a time.
Right.
When you become an educator or a leader, but in this situation, she was talking to me as the educator, your ripple gets a little bit bigger. And what you should be doing as a professional, looking for opportunities to make, wider impact, broader impact. And so as I was considering, taking this leap to being the CEO of a company, it was one of those things of like, this is something that I could actually make a bigger impact within the simulation community, within health professions, not just nursing. And that was one of the things that potentially motivated me is like, I'm able to have a broader impact. And having Pam, I'm sure as your former dean, you had an advocate in that leadership position, but for you to be able to move into that role of now being an advocate is amazing.
It is. And it helps me, recognize that Pam was such an amazing mentor to me. And so that's what I want to contribute to the rest of the faculty.
Yeah.
I want to be the mentor that pulls everybody up as well.
Yeah. So what was it like hiring your replacement there in the Sim Center?
It was fantastic. We had several applicants and we kind of narrowed it down to 2, and both of them were fantastic. Both of them had been NLN sim leads in the previous cohort prior to us going.
Oh, wow.
So that was, and that's, actually one of the things that I looked for is I set the job opportunity out there to the sim lead groups to say, look, this is coming up. And so, it was a kind of sad in a way that I was stepping away, but at the same time, wonderful knowing that the person who's coming in is going to do a far better job than I was doing. She's already doing a fantastic job.
Well, more eyes on it, more people that are passionate about it, the better, right? So amazing.
Yeah, and I can now support her in a much better way than I was being supported.
Yeah, yeah. So when now you are kind of mother to many or leader to many. So when you think about that, what are the things, if somebody's presenting to you a budget need, what are the things that you're wanting to see? We've kind of talked about it from what we had to present or what you needed to present. And obviously you're an accountant, so you can, or you have accounting background, but what are the things that you would want or need from the people that are presenting ideas or needs to you?
Yeah, so I want to know how it's going to be used and how much it's going to be used. Mm-hmm. So, we see these simulators at some of these conferences and they're really high tech, one will shake your hand and, okay, well, that's great, but how are you going to use it and are you going to use it every day? And so those are the kinds of things I'm looking for is what is the usability and are you going to use that part that makes you, you're picking this simulator above all the others for this one or two things. What are those one or two things? What's the usability? Are you only going to use them once, or are you going to use them all the time?
Right. Does it need to shake your hand?
Absolutely. Right. Does it need to shake your Absolutely.
Justify that purchase.
Yeah.
And so, what are the potential things that, I don't know how many people have presented things to you, but have you come across things where it's just like, I need way more information than this? Like, what are some of the pitfalls that could potentially happen as
Well, and that's the kind of thing I just ask questions. Like, okay, you want to buy this $180,000 simulator. Wait a minute. Could you purchase a wearable at a standardized person for the same cost, right? How many times could we run the scenario with a standardized patient that, before we even meet the cost of what this one simulator would be?
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of questions I ask. How much are you going to use it? What are we using it for? Is it only going to be used for one course, or does it work throughout the programs?
So it's kind of like doing a needs assessment for product purchases, right? You're looking at how is this going to be used? What are the gaps that we're filling with this? Or, is the purchase necessary, or is it better for us to look at this? So it really does take kind of the emotion out of it, of, the decision-making process. And then, from the perspective as a person that is really into standardized patients and obviously wearables, but the idea also of, does your simulation, or do your students need to learn communication as part of their, the whole idea of understanding a therapeutic relationship, understanding their professional role? Like, is that part of what you're trying to accomplish within the simulation itself? Because then it's going to speak to, that piece of it versus the mannequin that can shake your hand. Funny story behind that is we had a gentleman from Duke University. I don't remember who it was, but he was coming through, and I think he had applied for the dean position at the university that he used to work at. And we were showing him the wearables. This was when it was, looked like it was put together with bubble gum and glue, when it was very early prototype stage. And he said, funny story, we've spent a lot of money and a lot of time trying to get it so that when you walked into the mannequin's room, that he could just reach up and shake your hand, or lift his arm to get the blood pressure cuff on. And he said, you figured this out without having to add the technology to it. So yeah, it is one of those things of just, what are your objectives? What are the needs from your students? What are your employer satisfaction surveys saying? What are your new grads saying they wish that they had learned? And then, that all helps to inform the decision in making it a purchase, because yeah, you're going to have to purchase the wearable, but at what point does it become financially neutral?
Well, and a plug for the standardized patients is, if you've got a scenario where you want the patient to shake their hand, why wouldn't you use a standardized patient?
Yeah,
right?
True. Yeah, good point. Exactly.
And that's the whole thing. Every scenario needs that communication, right? And that is one of the things that we're hearing from our practice partners, that new graduates, they don't want to talk to the provider or talk to the patient. They'd like to text the patient or text the provider, but they don't want to talk to them. And so we've really started to focus on making our scenarios more with standardized patients or a standardized family member in there, so that communication has to happen.
Yeah, it's huge. It's so huge. And they, the research says that they care more about what the standardized patient has to say during the feedback than the facilitator. That's not necessarily complimentary of us, but they really do. They need help with that. And, they've mentioned that they don't feel prepared when they get into a clinical setting, handling these difficult conversations. And so the perfect place to give them that opportunity to practice is in simulation with a standardized patient. Again, I'm a shameless plugger for standardized patient methodology. That's my world. And it's just something that I really saw as a need for our students. And I'm sure and read that it's not just at one university, it's pervasive. So I agree with you on that for sure. So you have another life. You are also a consultant.
I am.
And you started Simple Sim with one of our other Sim sisters. It should have been like Simple Sim Sisters or something like that. But so if you could tell a little bit about, as a consultant, you've been out there now and consulted with several of the programs. So what are the things as far as budgets going, like the budgets that are successful? Like you obviously had your budget once you got to GW, but what are some, have you worked with any other programs that have been able to advocate and get their own budgets within the SIM program?
Yeah, and a couple things when it comes to budgeting is you want to make sure that you plan for professional development for your faculty, your SIM team, and your SIM director. Like, because simulation is continuing to evolve and it's doing it pretty quickly right now, we need to make sure that we all stay up to date. And so that's one of the things in consulting, I always make sure to tell people, make sure you budget for the annual meetings, right? The summit or the NLN SIM Summit, not SIM Summit, the NLN Education Summit, and Axel, SSH. You want to go to those opportunities whenever you can. And you also want to make sure that you budget for other professional development, whether it's, education and updates related to SIM pedagogy or the theory or anything that keeps your team up to date. And so that's one of the things that I tell them. The other thing is do a needs assessment. Really look at your program and decide what is it that you need, what's missing, what's keeping your program from meeting the needs of your learners. And that's when you can really advocate not only for your own budget, but for those big expense items, because you can say, here's what we need, and here's the gap that is filled.
It's needs assessment or gap analysis. Those are the two words. We will offer our free resources as far as the gap analysis goes so that people can utilize that. I think it's really important that you are utilizing something that is going to help guide your conversation with your leadership. And it's also something that's written so they can refer to it in advance or, after the conversation. So those are really good tips and tricks. Anything else that you've seen along your travels with your consulting position?
Well, if it helps any, I have utilized the book SIM Champions by Falsey Gall Layton many, many times, and it has a lot of free resources in it as well when it comes to budgeting. So it's a great resource to help you. You can download a lot of the templates to kind of help you decide, to help you formulate your budget.
Excellent. Well, that's a good resource. So last question. I'm asking everybody this, but I want you to fill in the blank. I knew I had crossed the threshold. I am a simulationist when.
Oh, wow. I knew I had crossed the threshold, and I knew I was a simulationist when I got accepted to the NLN Sim Lead.
Oh, excellent.
That really was the pinnacle changing point for me.
Yeah, definitely. I think all of us that have stayed really tight would definitely point to that Sim Lead as being super impactful. And our acceptance was really, I can remember being in my office and just, crying and jumping up and down. I was so
jumping up and down and squealing. I'm like, oh my God, I got in.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Crystel. It was a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
All right. So we just heard from Crystel on her perspective with budgets, justification, and hiring, which again, I think just lends itself to such an interesting conversation of how it changes in terms of looking at it from a sim center and being able to kind of make the appropriate decisions based off of, what's best for running the sim center, because it's not always going to be looking at it from that budget perspective.
I think a couple of big takeaways for me. We never had an advisory board. And I think that probably would have been a really smart idea, right? It would help with buy-in. It helps, that you have more, rather than me just going and Mother may I, I learned the approaches. I never really understood fully budgets until I got into a director position. And I do think that there's some sort of assumption that there's a fundamental understanding. I did budgets at home, but it's very different, like capital budgets, operating budgets, and all that other stuff. So I think Crystel had a unique, I think she said she was an accountant or had accounting background. And so she really was able to take what she had from her previous life, right? And she then went through an accelerated nursing program. So that's how she got into nursing. But I think it's really interesting, the idea of an advisory board to help support growth moving forward. And, it gives multiple perspectives, especially if you have an interprofessional sim center. I think it's huge. getting, the hospitals, administration to come in and talk about your grads and what skills they come in that are solid and what skills need to be worked on. I mean, again, I think it's huge. The other big takeaway for me, again, the Sim Leader group, we could all of us could talk all day about it. But I think the other big takeaway from my perspective is looking at the hiring process and making good decisions about who you're hiring. Back in the day, to get a simulationist would have been impossible, right? Like, thinking about when did that, and now it's starting to be that you actually have a pool of people with simulation background, simulation experience that are applying for these positions in some places, not everywhere. And it's just exciting to see how this industry has grown and how quickly it's growing, how quickly it's changing. Research is really informing our practice. Again, I think that it's a unique perspective on how you bring all of these pieces together and then really make it into some really positively high-functioning sim center. And Crystel's done that at GW.
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. And my big thing that I think is genius too is in terms of her having a priority list in terms of when budget gets available, right? So for her, it's okay, if I can get $5,000 at the last minute, what can I get with that $5,000? If I have $1,000, what can I get? But having a list of that, I think, is so helpful versus being told, because again, we all know that in terms of when there's money available, if you don't jump on that, that money disappears. It's not as if that money gets rolled into something else. It's not as if it goes, like that money's gone once it's gone. And I think being able to have that priority list ready to go, that is also based off of an advisory board, right? So they have the conversations
supported already.
Have the conversations at the advisory board, have group decisions in terms of what is on that priority list, because it also comes back to you not constantly going to the dean all the time for more, right? It's like, okay, well, we need this. It's like, okay, we'll add that to our priority list in terms of when funding becomes available, because we don't have the ability to put it into budget. So this is where we'll add it into. We'll have different stages in terms of this is our under $1,000, this is our $1,000 to $5,000, this is our $5,000 to $10,000. But having ranges, I think, is also super helpful for when those things come up. Again, you're ready to spend it, you're ready to go, and you know what the needs are versus you needing to, like, kind of having a meeting, it coming out that you have this money, you now needing to go back to an advisory board or going back to your team to figure out where the needs are, waiting to get a quote, waiting to, it just, again, by all of those steps, you lose it. It's gone. It doesn't come back.
Yeah. Or you don't spend it wisely.
Because you're just on to the next thing. Yeah. But really being able to have that priority list, especially amongst an advisory board, to me, I'm just like, it's genius. It's absolutely genius, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the idea that there's funding from multiple sources, it doesn't just have to be from budget. We had one of our former employees, Kim DeYoung, she basically funded an entire community college sim center with donations and with, grant funding. She just, that was the option that she had. I mean, I'm sure that they got Perkins funding and things along those lines, but it is the idea that it doesn't only come from one source, and there are opportunities. And a lot of time, people like your deans, directors, maybe even your president or your provost may know, oh, there's a foundation that, supports us biannually with, healthcare costs, and, that you never even knew it, I just think that we as at the company at Avcan became really aware that congressional funding was starting to reemerge. And so we've been able to help support a lot of our customers who wanted our products but were struggling with funding on submitting, a short application. It's not like a HRSA grant or, an NIH grant. So it is a way to find sources of income that are going to offset some of the costs. And sometimes you can even negotiate, well, if we can manage this much in capital budget, then we may be able to raise this much philanthropic donations or whatever the case may be. So I think, again, there's more than one way to get there. And having that priority list really helps focus your attention on what is the next thing that you're working on.
Yeah. I think there's so many valuable lessons to be learned from Crystel just in terms of her being able to run that sim center. And I think that it's also so helpful when you are entering in from kind of a sim faculty perspective to understand the mindset of leadership, right? Because I do think it's just a completely different way of how it is. They don't think the same way and they don't look the same way, but it is if you can discuss the viewpoints of leadership, and then we can craft our messaging and our approach based off of what their needs are, you're going to get a lot more yeses than nos. And again, it does depend on how bought in they are to simulation, and there's a lot of factors. But it does help when you can gain some perspective on that. And I think that that's what Crystel really offered people, is being able to understand that other side of it, and being able to discuss that further. So Crystel, we really appreciate your time. We really appreciate your insight on being able to help us with all of these different kind of pieces and components. And I think that the main thing she really focused on was putting in the forethought really helps you then not scramble when it comes up in the long run. And
Yeah.
I think that,
But I will say this, the nuts and bolts of how to put that forethought in is in Elena Harrington's presentation in her podcast, because she really talks about being able to figure out piece by piece how to come up with cost centers and things along those lines. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, stay tuned, because that one is going to be something that's going to be really helpful for you as far as laying that foundation and getting your homework done ahead of time.
all right. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.